Becoming a successful professional speaker is a journey. How do you find that first stage, the next stage, and then the bigger and better stages? I'm Lee Hayes, your host. My co-hosts and I are here to guide you to a more successful speaking career. You're listening to Path to the Main Stage podcast. Welcome to another Path to the Main Stage. As you just heard, I'm Lee Hayes, your host, the founder of Go Leeward Speaker Management, and I have a treat for you today. A lot of emerging speakers start with nothing. They have a business or an interest and they say, I'd like to be a speaker. And the one thing I always say to them is, you need to have some level of celebrity, meaning you are known by people. And then you have, like my co-host today, who we'll get into, who is known by people and then got into speaking, but it's still a journey. So today's co-host, who I'll bring his name in a moment, but he has been on TV for over 2 decades, host of This Old House, Ask This Old House, Team Rubicon, and I know several others, which we can talk about too, but he's been seen by millions and millions of viewers. And I know there are a lot of guys who have a major, was it boy crush or bromance? But here's why. I've decided on why. I think, and this is not, I'm saying men, but don't get me wrong, this is definitely both genders. I think a lot of people look, for example, at professional athletes and go, wow, man, they get paid to play a game. Well, today's co-host goes one level higher. He gets paid to play with tools. I think I remember growing up, my dad would take me every Sunday. We went to the bakery, and right next door was a hardware store. And my dad was a very serious man. He was a serious chap, but boy, put him in a hardware store and it was like me in a candy shop, right? He's like, oh, you need to get a different size screw or a nail or a tool. Like, he loved it there. So I get it. I get it. Being paid to play with tools. What a great job. Let me bring him on now officially. Welcome, Kevin
Very
O'Connor.
nice to be here, Lee. Thank you very much for the invite.
Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate having you here today because I think you're going to lend a completely different aspect or direction of coming at speaking. So I'll let you jump in first. You had mentioned that how we met. How did we meet?
Well, as you know, but for your audience's benefit, I used to be represented by a very large agency. And I'm not going to name them, but one of my very first meetings with them in Manhattan on a very high floor in a boardroom, maybe 15 people around a table, all pitching me. You know, one was going to be the book agent, one was going to be the speaking agent, one was going to be the TV, all this kind of stuff. And it was exciting. I will not deny it. It was exciting. And I signed up with the firm. I have to give them credit. We quickly went and we published a book with their help and nice advance. It all went as planned, which is terrific. And then after that, it just, quite honestly, pulling no punches, it was a disaster. In particular because of the speaking representation thing. And the long story made short is that this was an organization that was fighting for things that I didn't care about, and as a consequence was representing me in a way that I didn't want to be represented, insisting on perks and treatment and delivery and flights and all these types of things that made no difference to me at all. But that's what they did. That's what they were good at. Anyway, uh, I didn't enjoy the experience. They were not a good fit. And then one day I got a call while I was represented by that firm from somebody trying to hire me for something else. And the person on the end of the line was very nice, very professional. We actually connected, had a nice conversation. I was unable, in my recollection, I was unable to fulfill the request because of a conflict or something. Not quite sure. But after I hung up the phone, I remember thinking, boy, I wish I was represented like someone like that and not this monstrosity down in Manhattan. um, so, leapfrog a couple years forward, I had been doing stage presentations, lots of them, sort of meet and greets, weekend home show type stuff. And a very good friend of mine said, get into corporate. You got to message to tell, you're a known entity, like get into it. And I never thought of myself as that, but I decided I would look into it. And I knew I wasn't going to go forward with that big Manhattan firm. So I called back the person. I don't know why I wrote down the name, but I did at the time. I called back that person who I had the phone conversation with, and I was delighted when Lee Hayes picked up and said, "Oh, hey, Kevin, how are you?" And you tell me, how many years between that initial contact and that return call do you know?
A
Really
couple
smart.
years, yeah, because when you first mentioned that, I was like, "Really? I called you?" Um, because I don't work a lot with against celebrities. And I know sometimes you'll say, "Well, Lee, I'm not really a celebrity. I just happen to be a guy on TV for 20 years." And I think maybe forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's because you did not seek out, you didn't start your career going, I'm gonna be a TV personality. Right? You started as a finance expert, and I think celebrity was thrust upon you where they said, "We want you on
Yeah,
our
it was
show."
the last thing on my mind. I joke that I wasn't in a school play. I wasn't even in a home movie. So it wasn't like I was a banker,
Wow.
blue suit, finance, liked that whole thing. I loved construction and I was a fan of This Old House on the side, but just sort of as like weekend warrior thing that I think a lot of guys do. You know, they do one thing and they have a passion for something else on the side. So when This Old House showed up at my house to film an episode for their new show at the time, Ask This Old House, which is now 22 years old. Um, had it been any other television show, I would have said I'm busy. I got work to do. But because it was my sort of childhood heroes, Tom Silva and the gang, I said, sure, come to the house. And before I knew it, they offered me the gig. Again, not a gig that I would have taken in television because it didn't really interest me. In fact, not only did it not interest me, but I was like, who wants to be on TV? It seems like a miserable job. But yeah.
And it can be, I understand. Not
Oh
always,
yeah,
but it
I've
can be.
since learned it's a really tough job. I mean, there are some TV jobs that don't get me wrong are phenomenal, like, absolutely, but a lot of them are really
Mm.
tough jobs that don't often end up going anywhere. But yeah, so I was like, if you're gonna let me work with the fellas from This Old House, I'll do that for a year or two, and then I'll go back to my
Eh,
banking gig because banking's not going anywhere. So yes, was not looking to be on television. Certainly was not looking to be a celebrity. None of us on the show, I believe, treat ourselves like celebrities or act like celebrities, and I think that I still don't. So I guess you could say thrust upon me is a good descriptor.
Okay. No, you definitely do not behave like a celebrity. Well, so I'll tell some more stories about our journey. So indeed, the first time when you called back and you said, "Hey, you called me once before," like I'm sort of returning your call 3 years later. I remember my first reaction was, I said, "I'm so sorry, I don't work with celebrities. Like that's because of the bad behavior." And you said, I'm a nice guy, Lee." And oh my God, you are. Like who knew? But it took a while to convince me. And this is funny because I was actually speaking to someone over the weekend who is a TV producer. They do, all these new shows and trying to get them out there. And I said, "What do you think of working with celebrities?" And he goes,
Oh
"Worst
my
part of my
gosh.
job." Because, right? Worst part of my job. He said, "Because people will come on, just like you were describing, we want you to do this little show." He said, "They give me a
Ugh.
list, and we have to send people out to get the right brand of water. He said, all these crazy things." And he goes, "And they don't use them." That's the most irritating part, is they'll say, "I need a 750-watt microwave in my room with a refrigerator with whatever in it." He goes, "They never
Yeah.
touch half the stuff. It's just they've been trained." He said they've been trained to be awful. And it really sounds like that was your bureau experience. And here's for everybody who says, "I need to get into a bureau to speak." You do not need to get into a bureau to speak. But it's so interesting that their focus was treating you like a celebrity versus finding you speaking gigs that
Yeah,
were a
I mean, I
fit.
think what you described, your friend's experience in dealing with these personalities, I think part of it is a flex. It's sort of the personality sort of asking for stuff almost as a
Mhm.
flex. And what I realized was that the agency that I was working with was doing the same thing. They wanted to be able to
Yeah.
call me back and say, I got you the gig, but I also got you the proper green room and the right hotel, or all this other kind of stuff that I just don't care about. And it made me wonder, like, first of all, how many clients are you losing? Potential clients are you losing because you're putting this big long list together? But more importantly, I have to be the one to go and hang out with that client. Like I'm going to go to their event
Mhm.
and I'm going to show up, and the only thing they know about me is the list of demands that you presented to them. Like, I was
Yep.
embarrassed
Yep.
by that to literally shake hands
Yep.
with the person who hired me. And in the back of my head, thinking, oh my gosh, what did my people put this person through? Because I would never do it. So that was a big thing. Since we're on it, the other thing that I came to
Yeah.
learn, because you talk about, getting with an agency, this is something that I did not know existed, but part of that 12-person pitch in the Manhattan boardroom was a lot about having me sign on a dotted line. And what I didn't realize that when I signed on a dotted line, I was basically captured by that agency. And it
Mm.
did a couple of things. It increased the roster that they look at all of the people who we represent. So it benefited them.
Yep.
And secondly, it took me off the market with their competitors. So no other agency could sign me up and all this kind of stuff. And it's a industry term called back pocketing. So they basically had the option of finding me gigs because I was now represented by them, or simply just tucking me into a bottom drawer and taking me off the market so that I wasn't competing with their other home improvement celebrities or whatever. And I learned that sort of the hard way that, these guys actually can back pocket you as well. And sometimes I don't know if it's across the board industry. I really don't know, but I found out that it was something that the industry does do.
Yeah, no, I didn't think about that back pocketing, but you're right that I've spoken to many people who've had a similar experience. I was talking to a guy the other day whose name you'd know, who you viewers, you would all recognize him. He's an Olympic gold medalist. He had a similar experience where he was with a bunch of agencies. He had doing a lot of speaking through agencies, and one agency came on really strong, like you're describing, that we are going to really launch you and do amazing things. And he goes, I bought in and I signed, so I was exclusive with them, meaning if anybody wanted to sign him, they had to go through him and split the commission. And again, splitting a commission is a turnoff. Because I'll get that sometimes, right? If an agency calls me about you, they'll say, "Well, Lee, what cut do you take? What cut do you take?" I said, "No cuts. Let's just go through you. Let's figure this out," because that's an immediate turnoff. If I'm gonna tell them they're only getting half their commission, end of conversation. They're like, "So you're saying he's not available?"
Right.
And that's the end of it. And that's what happened with this speaker. He said nobody else, like everybody else, stopped signing me because they don't want to split. And the company that took him on, he said, I did not speak for 2 years. It just ended. And at the end of 2 years, he goes, what they basically told me was every event that would ever want to hire you already has. There are no events
Oh,
left. And he goes, huh. And I thought, that's sort of odd because from what I understand, on any given day in the US, there are
yeah.
3,000 events. And while he was speaking, 20 times a year, I really don't think that covers every
Yeah.
event in the US. But that was the excuse. They said, it's not us. We're doing our job.
Yeah.
Nobody wants you.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned his name to a few people now, and they're like, are you kidding me? We would love to
Right.
have him.
Buyer
So,
beware for sure. Absolutely.
yep, yep. So what we're saying here, viewer, is bureaus are not the end all. I'm not saying, don't use them. I have bureau agents that help me all the time. But certainly not the end all. And certainly, like you said, watch what you're signing.
Yeah.
It's
That certainly, and I just have to say, most importantly, for me at least, the person who represents me has to reflect my values. It's just as simple as that because they are the first point of contact with the clients. And as you know, with just the clients that we've worked together with, they become colleagues. They become
yeah.
professional references, friends. They lead to other opportunities, which aren't always speaking opportunities, but are intertwined. And to think that not only all that opportunity sits there, but that it could be soiled because you've been represented poorly by someone who doesn't represent your values or who you are. That doesn't sit well with me at all.
Great point. I love that. Yeah, understand your values before you sign up with anyone or work with anyone. So, all right, well, let's talk a little bit about your journey. We'll get into the meat of it here. You mentioned doing a lot of appearances before you actually did keynote speaking. Can you just talk about what is the difference between, which you used the term once, grin and grab, which I love. I'd never heard that term before. So what is the difference between a grin and grab and getting on stage and actually keynoting?
There's a big difference. There's a much different expectation for the two audiences. There's a different price point. There's a different atmosphere. And most importantly, there's a big difference in what's the deliverable. So my experience, I'm fortunate to be on a show that has a 40 plus year legacy, and I joined an ensemble. And when people started calling me to appear at the weekend home shows, where all of the different vendors show up down at the convention center, and people come on the weekends and walk around, and they would put me up on the quote unquote celebrity stage. When those calls started coming in, they were coming in because not because I was Kevin O'Connor, but because I was the host of This Old House, and that made sense, and I respected that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually quite enjoyed it because the thing about television is that there's 1,000 miles between you and the audience created by the camera's lens. So you don't get the feedback that you would get if you were on stage or if you were in person. And so these weekend events became my immediate feedback. To stand on a stage and give a very lighthearted presentation about the current season and some behind the scenes stories of the projects that don't make it to TV, and to have the number one sentiment from the audience to be, thank you for delivering the show. You've helped me renovate my house. You've helped me save money, whatever. Thank you. Thank you. Like that's just easy. Like that's easy and fun. And it also means that you didn't step off the stage and you sign lots of autographs and take lots of selfies and you meet the kids and teach and all that kind of stuff. Very enjoyable. But as I mentioned to you, two things changed, and that was they're all on the weekends. And I had a young family at the time, and I would spend many, many weekends on the road. And I tired of it and decided to get out of it. Um, and then I had a friend come up to me and said, "Why aren't you doing corporate?" And I always said, "Well, I'm not for me. I'm kind of I've got a gig, and why would I do that?" And he basically said, "Because you've got a message. You have been in this long enough. And by the way, there are 3,000 events going on any given day of the year. So you will find your niche. You don't have to get up on the stage like Steve Jobs or Simon Sinek or whatever. You can find your niche." And that's what got me thinking about it. And it came at a time in my career when, because I'm the host, which means I'm the only non-professional tradesperson on the show, my job is to ask the questions and to stand down and defer to their advice, which makes sense. If you can get advice from Master Carpenter Norm Abram or Tom Silva or me, always take it from them. If it has anything to do with the house,
Go
go with
with
them.
them.
Go with them. So I sort of suppressed my voice. But 20 years into it, and having seen what I've seen, I did realize that, I had a voice and stories to tell and a different perspective that maybe the professional contractor might not say. So, my friend saying, corporate's a whole different world. Try it, and me feeling like the time was right is what got me into it. And the big difference is the the audience is way more demanding. That is to say that the
Mm.
audience is there for a very specific reason. It's a keynote. It's their annual event. It's the big gathering of their association. It's the start. It's the first thing on the first day of a big week where people have spent a lot of money to come to, are expecting a lot. So the stakes are just that much higher, and the price point is higher, generally speaking, which means the talent pool is a lot higher. So the person they saw last year was really gosh darn good at it. And now it's your turn to stand on that stage and you've got to deliver. And I was perfectly aware that lighthearted stories about the current season and things behind the scenes that are going to end up in a grip and grin is not what they were looking for. They were looking for education, inspiration, motivation, and a high level of satisfaction. And you've really got to bring your A game to deliver that. And it requires a lot of parts and pieces. And as I found pretty quickly, a decent team to help you do it well.
This is true. Yeah, you have a good team now, but certainly what you're saying, I see it from the other end, which is placing speakers, that people expect two really big things from you. The client who hires you expects that your name and your reputation will
Right.
fill their seats, right? That people are excited to see Kevin O'Connor, this old house, oh my goodness. But the people sitting in those seats are not happy to just
Right.
have you show up. They actually want you to leave knowledge with them. Um, and the other aspect, which we've dabbled in, um, and we still need to work on, is the excitement of the brands to have you there. Because again, while you're imparting wisdom to the people in the audience, because you've worked with what, thousands of contractors, so that's certainly one big audience that wants to get knowledge from you. But the brands see you and go, huh, not he's imparting wisdom, so the people are excited. But he also realizes, because I got to witness this, that when you get off stage, you're like the Pied Piper, right? And all these contractors follow you to meet you, and the brands love that because now you're on the floor of an expo center. So you have lots of jobs when you speak, right? You got to draw, you've got to support, you've got to
Yeah.
teach, like you said, motivate, inspire. It's a big
It, it,
job.
it's a it's a job that's got several different clients. Your first point, which is 100% true. The person who hires you expects you. They need to know in the first sentence who you are. So and so from such and such, or the name's big enough that the name in itself, like they sort of need to know that because they have to deliver something that they can bank on. They don't know what they're going to get exactly, so they want a high level of confidence that they're fishing in the right pond. So, that gets you the invite. The audience, to your
Right.
point, wants that inspiration, that education, that motivation. Do that well, and that gets you re-invited. you know, Either
Right.
by that organization because they're just like, wow, he really delivered to our clientele, which is our members, or word of mouth gets out there and people say he did a fantastic job on stage. So yes, there are those two different clients that you have to sort of satisfy. And then to your point, how much further you're willing to go. Are you willing to stand down and shake hands and meet the folks, or as you pointed out, drag them off of the stage or from the auditorium onto the show floor because you're going to shake hands or sign autographs in a booth, and then the people who are ultimately financially making the whole thing possible have some benefits from it. It's a big ecosystem. There's a lot of different levers, and the more of them that you understand and are able to touch and help them pull, the more value you add to the entire proposition. And it takes a while to sort of figure out all those nuances and even longer to figure out how to deliver on what it is they're looking for.
Yeah, and something again you do really well, which other speakers need to, you, the viewer, listener today, you need to be aware of, is that when you do a keynote, that is one aspect of what they want you there. They're paying you to deliver a keynote. But what they really want is for you to engage the audience, and a big part of that can be
Yeah.
after you get off the stage. So if the plan is, and this is especially with celebrities, um, that the thought process is I'll get off the stage and security will whisk me to the exit and get me out. You're not thrilling the client
Right.
by doing that. And thrilling the client is a big deal.
And
So,
and they're going to want you to help promote the event to get their members excited about it. So they're going to ask you to
yeah.
record a call to action or a nice little PSA type of thing, or spread it onto your mobile. You have to ask yourself, are you on your mobile? Oh my gosh, on your social. Dating.
All right, we're
Yeah,
aging
or on
ourselves
that
here.
on that
Okay.
mobile thing you carry in your pocket. Will you put it out on your social and stuff like that? That's all delivering for the client. And it's separate necessarily than what the audience used to see. When I was doing those weekend home shows, here was the formula. I had so many requests for these things, with all humility, because I was the host of This Old House, and they were doing two things. The person who was organizing the local home show in the Phoenix, Arizona market had to generate excitement so the public would show up and then make sure that when the public showed up, they had a good time. Generating excitement was through paid advertising, but also free advertising. Um, and so they could book people on the morning radio shows in Phoenix and the morning television shows if it was the right person. So a big part of my job was
Hmm.
showing up the day before so that early Friday morning I could be on every local Phoenix television show and give them some This Old House, charisma, magic, drop some knowledge or whatever. immensely valuable to the client. And for better or for worse, the local beekeeper woman, the local TV stations didn't want to interview her. The magazines, newspapers
Right.
didn't want to interview her. They wanted to interview the person from this old house. And you really got to understand what is the value that you can provide, what is it the client is looking for, and how you can kind of skin that cat a million different ways. And it is just on steroids, I believe, when you go to the corporate world from that sort of retail home show world.
But such different timing, just like you said, which is for the home show, you're building excitement the day before. For corporate gigs, it's 4, 6, 12 months ahead of time that they're selling
Right.
tickets to the event. So it might be a little more spread out, or like you said, a promo video. You need your headshots, you need your bio, you need marketing materials to go out to them because that's just part of the
Right.
expectation.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's talk a little bit about your journey into speaking and getting on stage. I think, and tell me if this is different, that if you do an appearance, you can talk a little bit more off the cuff, right? Oh, I'll tell this story, I'll tell that story, be charming, smile. But to do a keynote, I'm guessing it took a lot more preparation because the expectation of the audience is so much greater. Like standing up there and being cute, right, is not good enough for the corporate office. They want meat. So how did you prepare, or what are the steps you had to go through to go from an appearance to a corporate keynote
You're
presentation?
you're 100% right in your characterization of that, and I would say that now that I've been at it for a little while, there's probably a part of me that realizes that one of the reasons I didn't explore the corporate earlier, um, is because of that challenge. I probably knew it at some level and was just like, ugh, like wow, that's a whole different thing. And it turned out to be a whole different thing. A a sort of retail weekend home show is very lighthearted. It's a lot of personality. It's a lot about accessibility. A corporate keynote is a very well written, well crafted um, presentation. It has a story arc, it has an emotional grab, it has a relevance. It requires, I believe, a deep understanding of who your audience is. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it is customized to just that audience, but that audience is a group of people at a moment of time with all of those human experiences going on in the world around them and in their industry. And you have to be connected to those things. You also have to be precise in your presentation without being robotic. So you have to deliver. It's not to say that you can't say or ah or forget, once in a while your train of thought, but you have to know how to recover from that. Preferably it doesn't happen. But most importantly, you have to show them that you are up to the challenge, that you're worthy of that spot on the stage when those thousands of people have sat down and given you the hardest thing to get, which is their attention. We are an attention society. Everybody's trying to grab our attention. What are you going to do to earn their attention for 45, 60 minutes and really wow them? You just have to prepare. And that preparation it can be exhausting and it's time consuming. It's repeating the presentation, it's working it through, it's putting it in front of people, it's writing stuff out, it's sending it off to folks and getting their feedback. I've done all of these things. I've dealt with professional writers. I'm a pretty good writer, but I'm not a professional writer, so let me bring one of them in and have them really take a crack at it. And that was good, but they provided a certain amount of what I needed, not everything. And then it was someone else who actually sits there and watches people speak and talks about tone and all this type of stuff. I was like, yeah, let me learn from that. I am in the business on my day job of being in a performance every day, a performance that is deliberately made to look casual, um, and very organic, and it is, but it still requires lots of technique and skill. And I came to realize, and as you know, that all of those things are required to be on the big stage as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of what you did is you've used props, which I thought was really cool. I think people got big kick out of some of the props you've brought up. How do you decide on things like that? Like, how did you work through not just what you were going to say, but how you were going to present it? As far as PowerPoint or things to bring on stage, was there any Any thought behind that?
Quite a bit. Just a couple sort of thoughts on that whole thing. The beauty of well, there's a couple things with the props. Let's start there. Props can be waypoints. They can be things that are sort of page turners to a chapter. When you get to that prop, you know exactly why you're there. And it sort of resets your pacing and it regrounds you as to what the next point is. It's a physical distraction that can provide you that a little bit of relief from being locked into the audience. Sometimes we get too stiff. Sometimes it feels unnatural to be staring back at 3,000 people, but you can't see them because the lights are so bright. Reaching for a prop is a way to kind of shake it off. And I know that from my television career, that there's always that opportunity. Movement is helpful, touching things are helpful. I will write a scene for our show in my head based on the things that I see. We're going to talk about the staircase. We're going to move up, talk about the window, and then we're going to talk about the flooring. If I keep those three things in my head, I now have a good map for my delivery. Props can help you do the same thing. In terms of deciding what to use, when to use, I bring a bunch of stuff that inform what I'm talking about. A brick and the history of building materials and how things are made to fit into your hand. A nailing plate that reinvented the building industry so that I can convey to people that there are ways to reinvent any industry through small incremental improvements, these types of things. And as I start going through the presentation, I pick them up and I start telling my point. And if it feels natural in my hand, if it's additive, I say, wow, maybe that actually works. And if it's subtractive or it feels a little clunky, then oftentimes I throw it overboard. And then once I make those decisions, every performance, big or small, is like a comedian trying their new material. And you go to a little mom and pop club down at the corner, not being televised for Netflix or anything like that, and you work through your material. You'll see the audience react. You'll be able to tell how they react to these types of things, and that's what I do. I try a little bit here, try a little bit there, work it into a couple presentations, deliver it. Some fall flat, some hit, some are kind of in the middle. Try again. It's an iterative process. It can help you in terms of your performance. It can liven up the presentation for the benefit of your audience, and it can elicit feedback from them that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten if you were just standing and deliver, which can then help evolve your presentation into something better. I have a I have a brick that I use in a presentation, and almost off the cuff, I didn't write it until I had gotten to my location, but I was talking about the brick and I was saying, what's so marvelous about it? And the joke was that I could get it through TSA. And the reality is that I was not thinking about it until I was standing in the TSA line, and the guy pulled the thing out as he's searching my bag, and he's like, "What's this?" And I said, "That's a brick." And he goes, "That's a brick?" He says, "Yeah." And he lets me go through, and it kind of wrote itself, and I tried it, and it worked, type of thing. So uh, that's sort of the creative process, but there's a discipline to it too.
Absolutely is. So I want to talk about pricing a little bit, pricing and value. We're not going to advertise here what rates you get, but what I want to talk about is value versus dollars, because sometimes newer speakers get very hyper focused on the dollars, right? I need to make X dollars to do an event. And if you don't give me that price, like, don't bother me. What points of value have you found from speaking that that enhance the rate? So you get a fee, but what other aspects are interesting to you or valuable to you in addition to that make, because you might say, there have been some events we've done together where you went, Lee, the fee is like their budget's a little tight or something, but they're offering X, which for one thing, I'm going to say across the board is video, right? Every speaker needs video. And if you have an engagement where they're going to be taking, a 2 camera shoot or, overhead or something like that, I consider that extremely valuable, because for you to hire a video team, to do like a flyover boom would be incredibly expensive. So that's got value. What else has value to you when you speak?
I'm trying to build a business which is corporate speaking, but that's a narrow definition of it. The business that I'm trying to build is relevance. I would like to mix it up with a lot of these companies and these organizations on a whole bunch of different levels. Certainly to be invited, to their big event and to be part of it. That's an honor. And as you and I know, you can get paid to do that. But these organizations do so much more throughout the year. They have charity initiatives, they have professional development initiatives, they have got an amazing network, distribution list of great companies, clients, and these types of things. And so to be able to play in that world on your own terms, requires you to earn your way in. And so that's the way I think about it. I want to be able to get on their stage, to be invited and to be paid to go there. But mostly, I want to be rubbing shoulders with high quality organizations with lots of high quality members. You know this, but I'll share the story. At one of the most recent ones that I did, a big part of what you and I sussed out was of value to them was me being able to spend time with their executive committee, their board, and then their members. And so we very quickly decided we would definitely go down the night before and partake in the dinner social hour so that we could mix it up there. And that given the timing of the keynote the next day, I would stay that second day to partake in the celebration, cocktails, dinner the next night. And that added a day and a half, 2 days to the trip. And our reaction wasn't, oh, double the price, it's twice as much time. Our reaction was, great, let's deliver as much value and see what we can find in all that extra time. Long story short, by the last day that I was leaving, one of the members, who I had made a connection with that night, he and I were on his private jet flying down to his factory, pre-producing segments for our television show. And he and I have been in contact several times since with other initiatives and these types of things. I would not have been in that situation if I, one, had not been invited to their event, and two, if I had not agreed to sort of dive into the deep end of the pool and say, yes, put me in the mix of all these people. He's a fantastic person who runs a great company, that has some value to our television show, but also does a lot trying to get young people to join the trades and training for them, which is something that I'm passionate about. That's phenomenal. That's of incredible value to me. And as you know, the organizers of the event are over the moon that one of their members has developed that sort of relationship in addition to all the time that I spent with their other members and stuff. So that's high value. And I firmly believe, I don't know when or where it happens, but I firmly believe that sort of experience, and the feeling that they get, in seeing me do that thing and us work it, and you're part of that too, the follow up and the communication, that they are pushing that, down the road and paying it forward by telling other folks, guess what? That's a good team to work with right there, and here's why.
It's interesting. I often talk about the power of no, right? That you can get your rates up higher if you can say no to certain gigs. But I think what you demonstrated, what you're illustrating is the
Sure.
power of yes. That if they say, would you please do this? Yes, sure. I'll hang out. I'll have lunch. I'll have dinner. Yes, sure. I'll talk to the people that are at the event. Yes, sure. I'll do whatever. Because yes can turn into all these
Right.
opportunities.
And we did the
So,
work.
so
We
important.
went through the list of all the companies in that association and we looked at them. Who are they? Where are they? What are they interested in? And we saw the synergies right away. And we said, we have no idea what's going to come of this, but let's find out.
Right. But yes, give it a shot. So, and that's what I love about one of the many things I love about you, Kevin O'Connor, is that you do say yes and that you customers love you, right? So that the one thing I love is after an event, because I always make that call. How was the event? How was the speaker? You will find, not you, Kevin, but you listeners, that when you get off a stage, people
Yeah.
say you did a
Oh,
great job, right? As you're stepping down those stairs, you were great. You were great. Could I do anything better? No, it was perfect. It was wonderful. And then I call and I go, how was the speaker? And they go,
mhm.
well, let me tell you. And I get this completely different feedback. So it's important to realize that you really need to go the extra mile, that they won't necessarily ask you to do that. They'll tell you everything's fine, but you need to know that it's fine. You need to know that, like, if you were them, what would they want from you? And to participate, to say yes and be supportive. And I love that you, Kevin, you're always like, you know what? They were great. They were helpful. They asked me to do this one little thing. Happy to do it. Now, like, I mean, it could get unreasonable, right? It's not that you could stay for a week, but to do the little things that you can do, little things can make a
Yeah,
big
and
difference.
this is something I've learned from working with the gentleman who I work with on the television show and the gentlewoman on the show and what we do. The price point might be very different between this event and that event. What often is not different at all is of how important it is to each individual client. Somebody might pay 3x, for your time, but that is the biggest thing on that day of their conference. And you need to
Mhm.
respect that. And the person who pays a third of that other person, it's just as important to them. And you need to respect that. We walk into homes all the time. And sometimes our homeowners asking us to do renovations have got all the money in the world to do everything. And sometimes people have had a fire and they're getting insurance claims, and that is it. But rebuilding their kitchen and making their house livable is no less important to that family because they have less money to do it, with great design and stuff. It is just as important to them. And I've always seen our guys, no matter what the project is or what the price is, work just as hard for that family. And I started thinking, like, geez, that's the same thing with these clients. The 1X and the 3X, different price point, but both, this is the most important hour of their most important week of their year. You better deliver.
Thank you so much. I'm almost going to leave the audience on that. So that's your big takeaway. But one final question, one way I like to wrap every podcast is, if you could talk to you when you started in speaking, what wisdom would you impart yourself that, you know what, if you had known this day one, that would have been helpful?
It doesn't matter where you are on the celebrity scale, Q factor, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. You have to start with a very clear presentation. This is a business, the people that those 3,000 events that are going on every day and the next day and the next day, there's a formula. And the sooner that you can fit into the parameters of that formula, the better and faster you will get up on the stage. Which means get your reel in place, get your website or your flyer or your brochure in place, get with your representative and clarify who you are, what you talk about, and what you can deliver. Figure those things out as soon as you can, dial them in and get as focused on that stuff as you possibly can, because you're going to need it. And you can limp along for 2 years and get little things here, little things there, but you're going to need that portfolio if you're going to break out and you're going to get a lot of gigs at a good price point. So that's what I would go. And this is ironic because you and I know we're now going back and forth with a sixth or seventh iteration of the reel and adding new things here. It's a never ending process, but you got to start with that stuff. You just have to. You got to show them that you've come to play.
Perfect way to leave it, because indeed it is a living process. But yeah, you got to start. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing so many good points to speakers who are trying to make it to that next stage. I really appreciate you. And to everybody listening, thank you so much. Join me next time on Path to the Main Stage podcast.
Thank you, Lee. It was a delight, as always, to work with you.
Thanks for listening to Path to the Main Stage. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And for full video episodes, check out YouTube. If you want to be a successful speaker, you need to make it happen. My co-hosts and I are here to help guide you. But if you need more help, please check out pathtothemainstage.com, where we can connect. And until next time, keep sharing your voice, keep showing up, and keep taking your path to the main stage.